Alright, so here we have two of the most popular 3070 laptops on the market right now. This is the Asus Zephyrus G15 and the Lenovo Legion 5 Pro. So sit down and buckle in, because there's a lot to unpack here. Obviously there's a lot of detail in this video, but I am working on a condensed version where I sort of summarize the major differences and try to highlight some key points. So be on the lookout for that. I'll link that here when that's finished. In the meantime, please enjoy. Both of these are in a pretty similar price range, depending on, the deal that you find and where you get it from. And both of them have pretty similar specs. Now, it took me a couple months to finally acquire both of these. I did it because I am just the type of person, I have FOMO, alright? That's the thing, alright? I just wanted to see if one was really, truly better than the other. Because the thing is, the Legion 5 Pro has an insane amount of hype behind it. That thing is getting just crazy hype. If you go on any laptop forum or Reddit or anywhere, or someone's like, hey, which laptop should I get? Well, they're 9 times out of 10, there's going to be at least 30 comments that all say, oh, Legion 5 Pro is the best laptop ever. I had to see what the hype was behind this Legion 5 Pro and if it was worth, trading in this beautiful machine for this not so beautiful one. But I told myself, all right, if the performance on this thing blows my mind, then sure, I will keep it, and I will be a Legion fanboy forever. But my findings weren't quite that way, so we're going to talk about that. I was just genuinely curious to see how they would both perform, and yes, I've seen Jared's text video on the Legion 5 Pro 3070 and the Zephyrus G15 3080 version, but I wanted to see how these performed in a real-life scenario where I'm actually playing the laptops at their native resolution in different modes, such as hybrid mode, or hooked up to an external screen, and see how it performs in different games. Because that was really the information that was missing from his video. Love that guy, love his videos, but I wanted to see the G15 hooked up to an external screen more, because that's what I usually play on. And I wanted to see the Legion 5 Pro in hybrid mode so that I could actually compare it against similar laptops. So that is what I've done here today. So before this, I also had a HP Omen 15. This was the Ryzen 7 5800H 3070 model. This was a 1080p one. I sold that, but I did a lot of testing on it, so I'll throw some of the data from that in here as well. First, let's get into the build, the ins and outs, the specs, and the little nuanced details of each of these machines. And then we'll get to the performance and the benchmarks. So the Asus Zephyrus G15, it's just a very light and thin laptop for what it's able to do. The body, sure, it's not all metal like, Razer or MacBooks, but it still feels very sturdy. It still feels premium. It is definitely sturdier than the HP Omen 15 that I had before. It doesn't really scream gamer, it has these nice little touches that I feel like kind of give it like a low profile but aesthetically pleasing design. So yeah, I really like the little mirror pieces on there, the reflective back cover when the light hits it at just the right angle. The glass touchpad is also just amazing on this machine. It's huge, it's super smooth, so easy to use, and it's centered. Same with the keyboard. I love centered keyboards and centered trackpads, because I like to keep, my palms resting on either side of the trackpad. So when it's centered, it just feels natural. It feels normal. The keys on this feel great. The RGB is, it's just fine. The lighting is very smooth on it, and you have a few different brightness levels, which is nice. Also, the G15 has a fingerprint scanner, which is really cool. If you take your time setting this up, you can actually get it to work most of the time. So basically, as soon as you press that on button to turn your laptop on, it just goes ahead and signs you in without having to do anything else. A lot of people hate on the G15 for the lack of a webcam. I'm also not sure why they didn't include one, but there's software on this machine that lets you use your phone as your webcam, and there's a bunch of other software out there that lets you do that. I usually use my phone as my webcam anyway, because most laptop webcams are trash, or just carry a small external webcam. The Legion 5 Pro does have a webcam, but again, like most other laptop webcams, it's not that great. Now, I've seen some concerns with the fan exhaust on the G15 hitting the bottom bezel and sort of hitting the screen. I haven't personally seen any quality control issues caused by this. Some people have tried to blame their issues on that. there's a lot of laptops out there with that same design and they're going just fine. Same with most people's G15s, so I don't think that's going to be an issue. Also, the quality control issues with the G15 have sort of blown out of proportion. Keep in mind here, most people have a perfectly fine Zephyrus G15. The ones you're seeing on the internet ranting are doing that because that's just how people are when they see like a couple QC issues pop up here and there. Now everyone's micro-analyzing these things and it's just gotten too much. So just remember, almost all these machines are going to be fine. Every laptop manufacturer has quality control issues, so the G15 is not much different there. Plus, it's the internet. That's just where people go to rant and complain about things, and it's just become a trend and pattern of doing so, especially with the G15, so don't worry about that too much. There's just a lot of haters out there. For the ports on the G15, you've got power, HDMI 2.0. I don't know why they couldn't just put HDMI 2.1, but whatever. Ethernet, USB Type-A, 2 USB-C ports. Now, both of these are charging capable and can do DisplayPort out. And then you have the headphone and mic combo jack. And on the other side, you've got another USB Type-A and a micro SD card slot. And this is another one where I'm like, why couldn't it just be a regular SD card? But whatever. Anyways, then a Kensington lock. The charging brick for the G15 is pretty small, very lightweight, and the cord is also really lightweight and flexible. So props to them on that. This thing is super portable. You can throw it in a backpack and not have to worry about it weighing you down too much. It's just a really portable laptop, and I'm super impressed with how easy it is to lift and carry it around even with one hand. So the Legion 5 Pro, on the other hand, is not quite so portable. Yeah, it's sturdy for sure, but this thing feels like a brick. It is noticeably heavier than the G15. One-handed lifting and carrying around is a lot more challenging. It's also a bit bulkier, mostly because of that rear exhaust piece. I mean, yes, I'd be less scared of dropping this thing, you know, and damaging it, but it's just heavy. This is a really heavy laptop for how thin it is. The hinge on this one feels a bit more sturdy. It requires a bit of force to open and close it. Also, the hinge sits on top of the laptop, so it is definitely taller than the G15 when it's opened. You know, and the 16:10 screen also makes it a bit taller too. The keyboard deck is where this thing starts to lose me. The keys on the Legion 5 Pro feel kind of cheap and mushy. Not a big fan of that. Also not a big fan of the number pad or big arrow keys. I rarely use those. You know, if you're someone who uses arrow keys all the time and number pad, then sure, you'll love this. I also hate how everything is shifted so far to the left on this thing, especially the touchpad. I don't know why they did that. You know, like I said, I like to keep both of my palms on my laptop base, and with the Legion 5 Pro, I'm just shifted to the left so far, and it feels weird. I can't get used to that. And one of my biggest gripes with this machine is the touchpad. Not only because it's so far to the left, but it just feels cheap and plasticky. It's just not anywhere close to like the G15s, and it's obviously smaller too, but it's not crazy small for a trackpad though. Thing is, with this trackpad, when I'm using it, my finger constantly gets stuck or it like slips across it and it's like bumpy. If you're like me, especially if your hands get a little sweaty sometimes, you will likely have the same issue. And it's super annoying, and but anyways, if you have an external mouse that you use most of the time, then this probably won't matter too much to you. But I just like to, you know, take my laptop on the go sometimes, just unplug it and only take that with me. And, you know, for web browsing and stuff, I don't always have a mouse hooked up, so that's where the Legion 5 Pro really falls short, is because the trackpad on the G15, I can browse, you know, YouTube and all that for hours and never get angry at my laptop. Anyways, but overall, the Legion 5 Pro sort of just looks dated. It has a really bland design, you know, and then the logo with the light is pretty cool. That's probably my favorite part, actually. But the rest of it is just kind of bland looking. It's just a laptop, you know. But anyways, let's get to the ports on this thing. So the ports on this thing are mostly on the back, which is really cool for people who plan to keep this on their desk the majority of the time, especially if it's the same desk. Keeps things out of the way, looking really nice and clean. So you've got your power, HDMI 2.1. You got 3 USB Type-A ports, a USB-C port with DisplayPort out and charging capability, and then Ethernet. On the left, you've got another USB-C port, headphone mic combo jack, and on the right, you've got another USB Type-A port, and a physical webcam disable switch, which is nice. And so I need to talk about the power brick really quick, because I don't know what Lenovo was thinking with this. This thing is massive. No one could prepare me for how huge and heavy this thing actually is. Even the power cable that plugs into it is super heavy and not really flexible. It's wild. It's crazy to me that they shipped this thing with this huge power brick. I can't figure out why. And I get it. I know this thing is powerful and it has more wattage to the GPU, but they did not have to put this massive brick in there. So that thing, it just makes this whole thing way less portable, especially if you're trying to charge this thing. But I know there are other power bricks out there that are smaller and compatible with the Legion 5 Pro, but expect to pay, you know, $100 or more for one of those. So something to keep in mind. The Legion 5 Pro actually has a brighter screen than the G15. This isn't really too beneficial for me since I'm not usually outside with these laptops. The G15 I feel like is plenty bright enough. I actually find myself turning down the Legion 5 Pro's brightness most of the time. I never usually even have it at max brightness. It's not like a night and day difference in the brightness. It's just sort of a nice to have if you're outside or somewhere with a ton of sunlight for some reason. But the G15 is perfectly capable of being plenty bright enough for most needs. Legion 5 Pro is also HDR capable. Now notice I said capable. It's not good at it, but it can do it. I found that when you activate HDR on Legion 5 Pro, it gets really washed out. The colors just don't look that great anymore, so I definitely recommend keeping that off if you have this. I would not credit that as a cool, unique feature of the Legion 5 because it's just not really good. I think a lot of laptops just aren't ready for that until we start seeing OLED screens more. All right, so let's quickly talk about the specs of both of these laptops. So both of these machines have higher level Ryzen processors, both of which are 8 cores, but the G15 has the slightly better 5900HS, while the Legion 5 Pro has the 5800H. So not too big of a difference there. Yes, the G15 does score higher, you know, in CPU-based benchmarks like Cinebench because of this, but not much. Now, both of these also have the same NVIDIA RTX 3070 GPU. This is the mobile 3070. Obviously, that's not going to perform, you know, very close to like the desktop version, which has like 10 times the wattage. But the thing here to note, though, is that the Legion 5 Pro uses up to 140 watts, while the G15 only uses up to 100 watts. So you would think with 40% more power in the Legion 5 Pro's GPU that you'd get 40% more performance, right? But no, not even close. It's not really. And that is why I decided to do this video in the first place, because people on the internet, you know, they're raving about Legion 5 Pro and the higher power draw to the GPU and how it just destroys the competition. But I had to find out for myself, and I'll showcase the test that I did here very soon. First, let's talk about the RAM on these. So in the G15, you have one stick of RAM that is permanently soldered to the motherboard, so you're not going to be able to upgrade your RAM, at least not in the ideal scenario of having 2 of the same size sticks running in dual channel. For example, you could put a 16 gigabyte stick in there with that 8 gigabyte stick for a total of 24, and the first 16 gigs will run in dual channel, but after that you'll see a drop in performance. So, but 16 gigabytes has been plenty for me, at least in games, creative programs. So that's not really a big deal to me. The Legion 5 Pro has 2 replaceable RAM slots, but Lenovo has been really shady about putting slower timed RAM in their Legion 5 Pros and other laptops. So this is kind of weird. If you get one of these that has the slower RAM timing, you're basically leaving performance on the table that you otherwise should have. Which is really annoying because that means lower FPS in some games and slower CPU performance than you normally should get. Thankfully, my Legion 5 Pro didn't have that slow RAM, but if yours does, be prepared to spend at least another $100 for faster RAM sticks. Both of these laptops come with software that helps you tweak their performance and customize your laptop. On the G15, you've got Armory Crate, which is as simple as just pressing this button right here above the keyboard. It starts up really quick and you can change your power options. You got Windows mode, silent mode, performance, turbo, and manual. Choose which power options you want based on, how much performance you need and noise that you don't mind pushing out. You also have your keyboard lighting effects. You can change the color profile and temperature on the laptop screen. You can also manually or automatically disable the RTX 3070 GPU here, which gives you a huge boost in battery life. And you can also have it, switch automatically as soon as you unplug the power cable. You also have the 60 Hertz refresh rate that can automatically do that too when you unplug it. I like to keep mine at a high refresh rate because I just love the way that feels over 60 Hertz. I can't do 60 Hertz anymore, even on battery. You can also see your stats on the GPU and CPU, which is nice. Their temps, voltage, etc. And then in manual mode, you can actually tweak some of this, such as your SPL values, which is nice. And there's also the function shortcut key that lets you switch between each of these performance profiles on the fly without even opening the software. The Lenovo Vantage software is pretty similar. It takes a bit longer to start up for some reason, but you can choose your power profiles here, your keyboard lighting. The most important feature here, though, is your hybrid mode toggle. So this is what's called a mux switch. So by disabling hybrid mode, your battery life will suck, but when you have it plugged in, you actually get a decent little boost in frames per second in some games because all the power is just going straight to your RTX 3070 without having to pass through the AMD Radeon graphics first. So this does require a restart every time you toggle it, but it is nice to have because the only way to do this on the G15 is by hooking it up to an external monitor through one of the USB-C ports. That is the only way to disable hybrid mode on the G15 and have all your power come straight from the RTX 3070. So with some of these comparisons, I'm going to have the G15 hooked up to the external monitor and also have the Legion 5 Pro in hybrid mode so that we can get an actual fair comparison here. But this is an advantage for people that don't have an external monitor because on the Legion 5 Pro, you can actually get a slightly better frame rate on the laptop screen itself. Now, battery life is a pretty big deal on these machines. Zephyrus G15 definitely wins in this category. This thing is just set up for great battery life. As soon as you unplug it, you can have it switch to internal GPU mode only and even have it switch to 60 Hertz refresh rate on the screen. I've seen people get between 8 to 10 hours of battery life on this thing, which is crazy good. Legion 5 Pro, you sort of have to jump through some hoops to get that battery life, and you probably still won't get it that high. I've seen people get as low as like 2 hours, but as high as like 8. So you will have to tweak some settings to try and get it higher, and likely you'll have to do this every single time you unplug it. So that can get kind of annoying. This includes like, manually disabling turbo boost, manually changing your screen refresh rate, switching to hybrid mode, which requires a restart. So that's a lot of work to sort of get the best battery life out of this. The G15 is a lot easier to just unplug and just go. Okay, so let's talk about the 16:10 aspect ratio on the Legion 5 Pro. So before we get into the gaming benchmarks, I really want to touch on this because I don't see it talked about very much. Both of these laptops have two different native resolutions. The Zephyrus G15 has a 1440p or QHD resolution. The Legion 5 Pro has a native resolution of 1600p. So here's the thing though, you're not really going to want to play on lower resolutions than the native resolutions of these machines. Like for example, 1080p is going to look noticeably blurrier on both of these than if you were to have a 1080p laptop. And that's because these laptops were built to run at their native resolutions. So things like 1080p are just not going to look as good, or 1200p on Legion 5 Pro. So, and the Legion 5 Pro is a special case here because of that 16:10 aspect ratio. 1080p does not fit into that. So 16:10, it just is not seen very often in laptops, even though we might see it more in the future, like on the M16, but we'll see. So this means that when you play a game at 1080p or 1440p on the Legion 5 Pro, there's either going to be black bars on the top and bottom, or it's going to vertically stretch the game and it's going to look awful. You can toy around with the NVIDIA and the AMD software to try and get everything to display correctly, the black bars to show up right. But I've found that doing this either sometimes just doesn't work at all because the game just doesn't support it, or tries to compensate, or sometimes the games just completely crash when you try to do this. So most of the time you're going to be stuck at 1600p or a lower resolution of that 16:10 ratio, such as 1200p. But you bought a 1600p laptop, you're going to want to play at 1600p. It looks a lot better. That extra vertical space is a little bit more immersive and it feels pretty nice. So yeah, if you bought the Legion 5 Pro to play games at 1080p, I will come find you and slap you myself. I'm just kidding. But you shouldn't feel good for doing that because it's not going to look good. Half the time I can't get the black bars to even show up correctly after tweaking with this thing for an hour. And sometimes games just crash when you try to even do it. So that being said, I'm going to be comparing these two laptops in their native resolution because that's just simply how almost everyone is going to be using them. And I strongly recommend that you do the same because that way you're actually getting what you paid for. If you want to play at 1080p, then I would suggest buying a 1080p laptop. I also want to talk about the thermals here. So Legion 5 Pro, I see a lot of praise out there for its impeccable thermal design. However, from my testing, it runs like most other Ryzen 5800H laptops. They get hot. I've noticed the G15 actually stays 5 to 10 degrees cooler in a lot of the same situations. So for example, here I'm playing Warzone and Legion 5 Pro is hitting in the 90s. And this happens pretty often actually playing Warzone, whereas the G15 will sort of range between the upper 70s and 80s range. Now yes, the Legion 5 Pro is clocking higher on the CPU, but that doesn't seem to come at much of a benefit to any frame rate, so not sure about that. You know, you would think it would just clock a little bit lower to sort of conserve temperatures because the GPU is handling most of the work there, but yeah, not sure why it does that. But this is a common thing in Warzone to hit sort of higher temperatures, upper 80s, lower 90s, so don't be too concerned about that. I sort of just wanted to squash the hype that the Legion 5 Pro has the best thermal solution ever because it's definitely just average. Same with the CPU wattage. Both of these have a pretty high boost wattage for their CPUs. The Legion 5 Pro can stay in that 4000 megahertz range. Same with the G15, and you'll see when I exit out of Warzone here, the G15 is running at a higher clock speed on the CPU, but still keeping those low temps. So they're definitely capable of high clock speeds on the CPU. The G15 just tends to use a little bit less CPU wattage in games, but it does really well for temperatures because of that. Obviously, in CPU-only loads, both of these laptops do really good. Okay, so let's talk about fan noise. Actually, both of these laptops are two of the quietest I've ever used. Here's how the Legion 5 Pro sounds when gaming. And here's how the G15 sounds. The Legion 5 Pro does have a little bit more of a high-pitched fan noise, but the fan exhaust is on the back of the unit behind the screen and the hinge, so most of that noise is actually being pushed out behind the laptop. So for you, at the front of the laptop, you might not hear as much, but for people in the room, it's actually a little bit louder than you think it is. You'll notice this if you put it up against a wall where the sound bounces back, or if you just turn it around, you'll see that it is a little bit louder like I do here. As for the G15, the fan noise is sort of bouncing back at you from the bottom bezel, so it might sound a little bit louder to you being right in front of the laptop, but to other people in the room, it's actually a little bit quieter. So this could be an advantage or disadvantage for either of these units depending on your use case. If you're commonly around other people, or if you want to take this thing to like a library or coffee shop, the G15 is probably going to be the quieter choice in that case. I also want to quickly talk about the two quiet modes on these laptops. So I've noticed the G15's silent mode is actually a lot better than Legion 5 Pro's quiet mode at staying quiet. I've noticed the Legion 5 Pro in quiet mode, the fans will still ramp up rather aggressively from time to time, just during normal daily tasks, while the G15 does a really good job just staying absolutely silent. The fans will kick in a little bit if they have to, but it does a really good job kind of limiting CPU power and GPU power to conserve energy and limit fan noise. To kind of test this, I ran the Shadow of the Tomb Raider benchmark on both of these machines in quiet mode. The Legion 5 Pro, the fans did kick in a good little bit in the benchmark, while the G15 stayed virtually silent. And the funny part is, you would think the G15 would score a lot less, being so much quieter during this benchmark, but it actually was just a little bit off, maybe 4 or 5 FPS lower. And I've also tested other games on silent mode like Minecraft, and it runs great. Productivity tasks, everything else also run great in silent mode without too much of a hit to performance. This would make me concerned as the Legion 5 Pro owner whether or not I would actually trust taking this thing into somewhere quiet like a library or a coffee shop. Whereas the G15, I would feel much more confident bringing it into those situations. Because that's one of my biggest things. I would hate to be somewhere and hear those fans just go off and be super embarrassed, get weird looks from people. I'm not a big fan of fan noise. Not a big fan. Now the speakers on the G15 sort of blow the Legion 5 Pro out of the water. There's actual bass response. These speakers are actually probably as good, if not better, than like the new MacBook Pros. They're actually really good. Very clear. Treble comes through super clear sounding, and I'll show an example of that here. And then the Legion 5 Pro is noticeably like muddier, tinnier sounding, just kind of muffled. Alright, so let's go ahead and talk about the gaming performance here. So, for the first game, let's talk about Warzone. So, on Call of Duty Warzone, I'm going to start with our hybrid versus hybrid comparison here. So, we're going to have the Legion 5 Pro in hybrid mode, and we're going to have the G15 in hybrid mode, obviously, because you can't change that unless you're on external monitor. In the hybrid mode comparison here, I'm running Warzone. We got everything pretty much at max settings here, native resolution on both laptops, and ray tracing on, DLSS disabled, and let's see how it fares. I switched between just 2 different spots on the map on private match practice. Yes, frame rates do seem to be just a little bit higher in Warzone when you're in the practice match, so something to keep in mind. So I land on top of this building right here, and on the G15 we're getting about 85 frames per second. In this spot, if you stay here, it'll usually range between that 83 to about 86, 87 frames per second. On the Legion 5 Pro in hybrid mode, you are getting about 89, 88 frames per second in this spot. So roughly 4, maybe 5 frames per second of a difference here. Not very much. So for the second part, I drop down to the staircase on that same building and I just look out in the distance. On the G15, you get about between like 90 to 94, sometimes even 95 or 96 FPS right here. Getting roughly the same frame rate on the Legion 5 Pro, about 93, 92, 94 FPS. So yeah, we have virtually no difference here in hybrid mode. So now let's talk about dedicated GPU versus hybrid. So this is for those of you who are going to be gaming strictly on the laptop screen and you want to see what the Legion 5 Pro is capable of versus what the G15 is capable of on screen. So that involves turning hybrid mode off on the Legion 5 Pro, which means restarting, and let's see how we do now. So the Legion 5 Pro gains about 7 FPS in that first area on dedicated GPU mode. So now you're about 10 FPS ahead of the G15 here. Jumping down to that bottom area on the staircase, you're hitting about upper 90s, 100 FPS right here versus the G15, like before, still hitting, mid, lower 90s. Obviously, I wouldn't consider this a fair comparison because the Legion 5 Pro is running with its mux switch on and the G15 is still in hybrid. But, if you don't have an external monitor, this is probably your best comparison. And just to sort of like best case, compare these things resolution for resolution here, I went ahead and just put the Legion 5 Pro on my external monitor to run it at 1440p without any scaling issues, and let's see the results of that here. So now on top of this rooftop, we're actually getting 1 FPS lower despite the lower pixel count, which is sort of strange. So the Legion 5 Pro in 1600p was getting 95 FPS here, now it's getting 94. Compared to the G15 in hybrid mode, which was getting 85. And then down on the stairs, we're now getting 102 FPS on the Legion 5 Pro whereas before it was getting 100 in 1600p. So you're getting a 2 FPS increase here running this thing at 1440p versus the G15 in hybrid mode at 91 FPS. This is for the people who think that, well, maybe running Legion 5 Pro in 1440p will show even better results, but you can see that you're really gaining almost nothing, sometimes even losing performance by trying out 1440p on the Legion 5 Pro. So unless you really like that 16:9 aspect ratio, it's probably just better off to play in 1600p. So here we have dedicated GPU versus dedicated GPU. This is the Legion 5 Pro with hybrid mode turned off and the G15 hooked up to an external screen so that it can bypass NVIDIA Optimus and disable its internal hybrid mode, basically. You know, this is probably the most fair comparison between these two GPUs. This is basically full power to the GPU, no Radeon graphics in the way, 140 watt versus 100 watt. Let's see. So now on top of that building, the G15 is getting 94 FPS here versus the Legion 5 Pro, which was getting 95. Jumping down to the staircase below, the G15 now gets 100 FPS right here, and that's identical to the Legion 5 Pro. So 40 watts of difference here, same frames per second. Looking back to how the G15 performed in hybrid mode in these areas, it gained about 10 FPS in both spots by hooking up to the external monitor. Alright, so moving on to control in our hybrid mode comparison here. Control we are running at absolute max settings, no DLSS, ray tracing on. Control is a much more GPU heavy game, so we should see more of a difference here, hopefully, with the Legion 5 Pro because it has 40 more watts going to that GPU. So loading up into the mailroom on both laptops, I'm getting about 33 frames per second on the G15 and the same on the Legion 5 Pro. Okay. So yeah, so both are getting about 32, 33 frames per second, sitting in the same spot. So then I move over to this other room right here where the frame rate increases a little bit. Legion 5 Pro, we're getting 39 FPS right here, and on the G15, also 39 FPS. Extra 40 watts, people. So now, like we did before, let's go ahead and put these two screens to the best of their capability. By that, really, I just mean turning the hybrid mode off on Legion 5 Pro and seeing how it handles dedicated GPU only versus hybrid mode on the G15. Again, this is for people that don't have an external monitor. This is your best comparison. So now, loading up control in that mailroom, we are getting 33 FPS here on the Legion 5 Pro in dedicated GPU mode. That is basically the same as before, maybe a 1 FPS improvement here. So that's just great. So basically you're getting no gains by turning on dedicated GPU mode here. Let's go ahead and move over to that other room. Now on the Legion 5 Pro, you're getting 40 FPS here. So that's a 1 FPS increase versus the 39 FPS in hybrid mode on the G15. So, you know, this is the part that's really funny. When you're playing GPU intensive games like this, there's almost no difference between these two machines. And again, like I did in Warzone, just to test it out, let's go ahead and drop the resolution to 1440p on the Legion 5 Pro. Maybe that will give us a few more FPS here. So yeah, this one actually does give you a tiny bit. You get about 3 more FPS in the spawn point on the Legion 5 Pro. So now you have a 3 FPS difference here. So instead of getting 40 FPS in the other room, you're now getting 42. So 2 more FPS by dropping down to 1440p. So again, doesn't really make much sense. Just better off to keep this thing in its native resolution. So let's go ahead and hook up the external monitor to the G15, test these things. GPU versus GPU, best they can do. So the Legion 5 Pro, again 33 FPS in this one spot at its native resolution. G15 now gets about 35 FPS right here. So now the G15 is actually beating out the Legion 5 Pro. Again, unless you're playing the Legion 5 Pro in 1440p, then they're about the same right here. Let's move over to that other spot where the Legion 5 Pro was getting 40 FPS. Now the G15 is getting 41 FPS right here. So you're actually still about the same. Basically just perfectly matched on both of these laptops. And what's funny is the Legion 5 Pro is actually running hotter on the CPU during this. So yeah, there you have it for control. So this is where the G15, even with a lack of a mux switch, still performs just as good as the Legion 5 Pro even with the mux switch. Alright, and then as a little bonus here, I ran Shadow the Tomb Raider benchmark on both of these machines in hybrid mode and dedicated GPU mode. So here's the results for that. As you can see, not much of a difference still. Even between G15's hybrid mode and Legion 5 Pro's dedicated GPU mode, you're only getting 7 FPS increase on the laptop screen at most. When you turn the Legion 5 Pro down to 1440p, it gets an okay little bump here of about 4 FPS, so that sort of widens the gap, giving you about 11 FPS more on the Legion 5 Pro. But again, not really worth that extra 4 FPS when you have that nice vertical space that the 16:10 aspect ratio gives you. Here are my charts for Call of Duty Warzone. This is outside of just those 2 areas I tested before. This is sort of an average of some of the higher FPS values while walking around in the practice mode. G15 and Legion 5 Pro both hit about 100 FPS in hybrid mode. About the same in dedicated GPU mode too, maybe a 2 FPS increase on Legion 5 Pro. You turn on DLSS, you get a nice little bump on both machines. G15 actually seems to come ahead a little bit here on DLSS, not really sure why, but at least in dedicated GPU mode. So yeah, here, this is where you'll see more of a difference if you're gaming on the screen only. Legion 5 Pro actually has 20 FPS more here. Versus the G15 in hybrid mode. But like I said, that's not the most fair comparison because the 5 Pro just simply has a mux switch and it's getting that full power to the GPU here. When you hook up the G15 to the external screen, it actually pulls ahead of Legion 5 Pro, showing you just how little that difference is with that extra 40 watts. Control. This is sort of similar to how I showed before, about 40 FPS in hybrid mode, about 41 in dedicated GPU mode. You really don't see much of a difference with the mux switch in this game. You turn on DLSS, and actually the G15 sort of pulls ahead here. Not really sure why it handles DLSS a little better, but you're getting about 3 FPS more when you're hooked up to an external screen on the G15. I also ran the benchmark in Forza Horizon 4. This is on the Ultra preset, VSync off, dynamic off. In their native resolution, the Legion 5 Pro only gets about 3 FPS more at 132 versus 129 on the G15. What's crazy though is in hybrid mode, the G15 actually pulls ahead of the Legion 5 Pro and a decent amount too. We're talking 12 FPS more here, which is crazy in hybrid mode. This could be a difference between that 5900HS and the 5800H, and I feel like that is further proven in my 1080p results. I just went and tested that and I was really shocked by the results here. So I tested both machines in 1080p, same benchmark. The G15 wins on both sides here. It pulls ahead 8 FPS in dedicated GPU mode and a whole 15 FPS more in hybrid mode, which is pretty crazy. I just wanted to throw that in there because this one was pretty shocking. Alright, so we need to talk about the Omen 15 in comparison here because I think a lot of people have the wrong idea about some of these laptops. If you're a frame chaser, which a lot of you are, it's okay to admit it, you should probably go with a 1080p laptop. So here's Control. On max settings with ray tracing. In their native resolutions, the Omen 15 is getting 20 more frames per second on the dedicated GPU. And on the laptop screen itself, it's getting, more than 15 FPS more on the Omen 15. Yes, it's playing at a lower resolution. It's playing at 1080p. But like I said earlier, if you switch one of these other laptops to 1080p, it's just not going to look as good as playing the Omen 15 on its native resolution of 1080p. So that's just something to keep in mind if you're trying to lower that resolution to get higher frame rates. With DLSS, here you go again, almost 20 FPS more on the laptop screen with the Omen 15. The Intel Omens have a mux switch, so you could even do that on the laptop screen for those and get close to this 90 FPS on the laptop screen, which is crazy considering that it's such a high demanding game. And just to sort of show you, the other 2 laptops aren't just blowing the Omen 15 out of the water in 1080p. A lot of people probably thought, well, the Legion 5 Pro is going to have way more 1080p FPS than that. No, it's about the same actually, except for in hybrid mode it does a little bit better, but not by much. Maybe 5 or 6 FPS more on the Legion 5 Pro in hybrid mode, whereas when you're just using the RTX 3070, NVIDIA Optimus is bypassed, they're all getting about 90 FPS. This just brings me to the point again of if you're looking to play at 1080p, I would highly consider a 1080p screen such as the HP Omen 15. If your eyes are more sensitive to, minute details, little textures, then yeah, you're going to see a benefit in that higher resolution even at a lower frame rate like me. So I prefer 1440p because I appreciate, you know, how text is a little smoother looking, and those little details just sort of pop out a little bit more on 1440p. I'm willing to sacrifice a little bit of frame rate to get there. I pretty much never put my G15 in 1080p because it just does not look as good as the Omen did running at its native resolution of 1080p. And there's a lot of research and theory on this, so you can look into that more. But basically, I've run the Omen 15 side by side with the G15, looked at both of them while playing Control, and yeah, there is a little bit of difference in sharpness and those little textures and details on the 1440p screen. But a lot of people won't even notice that. So, you know, if your eye isn't super sensitive to that stuff, you're probably better off with the Omen 15. So in conclusion, I'm going to have to give it to the G15. Not only is it perfectly capable of handling great frame rates at 1440p, but this thing has amazing portability, very lightweight, it has a premium feeling design, keyboard feels great, it's centered, trackpad is amazing, it's centered, speakers are awesome, screen quality, colors, accuracy, amazing. This laptop is just such a performer, and if you want to get that extra boost from disabling NVIDIA Optimus, all you got to do is just hook up this thing to an external screen, and boom, you're doing just as good as Legion 5 Pro, sometimes even better in some games. So my big point here is, you know, the Legion 5 Pro, sure, it has some great specs on paper. It has that 40 additional watts to the GPU, but I don't think they're being utilized to the best of their ability. I'm not really sure if this is a design because of Lenovo or what. Those 40 watts aren't really leading to much additional performance, if any at all. Sometimes even falls behind the 100-watt GPU in the G15. So that's just crazy to me. And I hope this just sort of squashes the hype a little bit about how the Legion 5 Pro is just this superior machine because of the high performance GPU. It's not. After seeing that Legion 5 Pro often runs warmer in games with those really small gains in FPS, I really just don't see the point in getting this machine unless you know, obviously there's availability issues, price differences depending on the deals you find. So yeah, if you saw the Legion 5 Pro, you know, for like $400 or $500 less than the Zephyrus G15, then sure, you know, it's still a great laptop at the end of the day. The biggest things that just drive me away from the Legion 5 Pro, again, the cheap feeling keyboard and just that whole keyboard deck, the sort of awful trackpad, and just the sheer weight of this thing is pretty insane. That 300-watt power brick is massive, and it just doesn't really make sense. I don't know why I would need all that just to get 5 more FPS in Warzone, you know, so to me it's not worth it. I would rather have the much more compact and elegant design of the G15 that I can just carry around, slip in a backpack, unplug it, it automatically switches to the internal GPU, I don't have to worry about battery life or anything, it just works. I also just like having more control with Armory Crate too, fan control, some wattage control, that's just nice to have. And, you know, I have that external monitor, so I can utilize that to get a higher frame rate if I want on some games. That's why I'm going to give the crown here to the G15. I just really feel like the G15 is basically the laptop that can do it all. I know it was overhyped for a while and then it got a lot of hate, but I really do feel like this machine is definitely worth considering over the Legion 5 Pro. So I hope this video sort of helps some of you with that. My only gripe with the G15, again, is the lack of a mux switch. I do think it's crazy that every gaming laptop doesn't have this by now. Let's just hope in the future with advanced Optimus and mux switches just becoming more common, let's just hope the next iteration of this machine or ones like it have a mux switch. So yeah, I hope this video helped you out. If you're deciding between these two machines or some very similar, even the Omen 15 is a great choice for 1080p gaming. Leave it a like if you enjoyed the content. Again, I know it sounds like I'm being super biased towards Legion 5 Pro, but this is coming from the perspective of someone who sees just a crazy amount of hype behind this machine, and I had to just figure it out for myself, and I'm just sort of let down. So, I mean, that's just my honest opinion. Hopefully none of you are hurt by that, but that's just sort of what I've concluded now after extensively testing both of these machines. So the proof is in the pudding, the data is there. Feel free to leave a comment on your experiences with these machines, or which one you have, which one you prefer. Or if you have any other questions, just let me know in the comments. Thanks again for watching. Hope you'll subscribe. This video took forever to make. It was a lot longer, a lot bigger of a project than I thought it was going to be. So I'd really appreciate, just a like and a subscribe if you could. Thank you again so much, guys, and see you next time.